So I've been studying Islam for a few months now, and I came across a verse that, no joke, by itself refutes Islam. And before you click away from this video thinking that this is just going to be like another low-level polemical video against Islam, think again. This verse that we'll be looking at today has very serious issues at the scholarly level. That's the level that we'll be looking at today. So if you're ready for that, buckle up. And if you're a Muslim, I want you to watch this entire video. Before we get to the verse, let me back up a second and just tell you a little bit of the background. So I was originally looking for verses in the Quran that discuss the Trinity, just to like kind of see what it says. I'm a Trinitarian. Does it refute my beliefs? That's when I came across Surah 5. Surah 573 says, "They disbelieve those who say God is the third of three, but there is no deity except the one God. If they do not refrain from what they say, a painful torment will befall those among them who disbelieve." So right off the bat, this verse seems to get the Trinity like wrong. Like it seems to be critiquing something like tritheism. So basically like polytheism. It's not actually attacking the Trinity. Look back at the verse here. It says that the disbelievers say Allah is the third of three. Third of three what? The next sentence tells us there is no God except one God. So then the verse is saying that Allah is not the third of three gods, which is a rejection of tritheism. Okay, so this verse isn't actually attacking the Trinity, it's attacking a straw man. Okay, but I want to be as charitable as possible. Let's just give this verse the benefit of the doubt. And also some scholars argue that this verse isn't even attacking a specific model of the Trinity. It's just trying to like target the view generally. Now, personally, I find that view kind of implausible, but again, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt here that this verse isn't straw manning the Trinity. Good. Let's go ahead and keep reading. Verse 74, "Will they not repent to God and ask his forgiveness? God is forgiving and merciful." And then we get to verse 75, which is what this video is about. "The Messiah, son of Mary, was only a messenger, before whom other messengers had passed away, and his mother was a woman of truth. They both used to eat food. Note how we make clear the revelations to them, then note how deluded they are." The part of verse 75 that's so problematic to the point that I'm convinced it actually refutes Islam is the part where it says they both ate food. The next line makes it clear that this is intended as some kind of like argument against a particular view held among Christians during the time of Muhammad. That's what the rest of this video will be focused on. I'm going to give three possible interpretations of this verse, then go through and show how each possibility has damning consequences for Islam. And again, I'll be appealing to contemporary scholarship to make my case. So as I say, the line "they both ate food" is supposed to refute something, right? The next line sort of triumphantly states that this makes something clear, but the question is what? What is it refuting? What is so clear after we understand that Jesus and Mary ate food? As I say, there are really only three options that exist in the literature. Before we get to the options, we should note that this verse kind of puts Jesus and Mary side by side, almost as if they're like equally involved in the same theological issue. So the verse basically wants to point out something it thinks that both of them, Jesus and Mary, have in common. And the fact that the same argument is used against both Jesus and Mary, they both ate food, implies an equation between the two, which is kind of strange to begin with in the first place. But in any case, if the Quran is critiquing Christian beliefs, it seems to be saying that whatever theological error applies to Jesus also applies to Mary. So let's take a look at the interpretive options before us. I'll also quickly note that I won't really be arguing which interpretation is correct because they all face extremely serious problems. All right, option one, Jesus and Mary are both members of the Trinity. That's option one. Option two, Jesus and Mary are equally divine. Option three, Jesus and Mary are both incorruptible. Now, if you've never heard that term before, it just means like immune to bodily decay, but I'll be breaking that down a little bit further as we get to that section in just a couple minutes, so stay tuned. So my contention is that all three options crash and burn under two major issues. A, there's simply no historical evidence that Christians actually held these beliefs, and then B, the statement "they ate food" does absolutely nothing to refute the view itself, even if some unknown heretical Christian group held it. All right, now let's look at each option more in depth. Let's start with option one, the idea that Jesus and Mary are equally members of the Trinity. Remember the earlier verse, the one that rejects the idea that Allah is the third of three? Well, on this interpretation, Christians believed that the Trinity is the Father, the Mother, and the Son. Right from the outset, though, we get our first major issue. There is zero historical evidence that any Christians actually believed this. Not a single credible source. Not one. Early church councils, writings of the church fathers, Christian creeds, all of them affirm the Trinity as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Mary was revered, yes, obviously, but never as like a divine co-member of the Godhead. If Surah 575 is supposed to refute this idea, it's aiming at a belief that simply did not exist. The Quran here would basically be setting up a straw man, addressing a doctrine that was never part of Christian teaching, or maybe the author just didn't really intend to set up a straw man, but simply misunderstood the Christian belief in the Trinity. That's a possibility. Then we get to problem B. The verse's logic is completely flawed here. The argument, they both ate food, is meant to refute their being part of the Trinity, but how exactly does that work? Like, Christians have always taught that Jesus, as fully God, chose to take on human flesh and live as a man. This included him being able to eat, to sleep, and experience human needs. There is absolutely nothing inconsistent about a divine being who contingently takes on a human body. Indeed, if one thinks that God is omnipotent, then one must admit that he can assume a body and act through it if he wants to. And in fact, that's just what God did, according to Christians. Christians believe that Jesus pre-existed the incarnation and contingently assumed a human body like ours. Christians have consistently emphasized this aspect of Jesus' humanity. So in short, eating food does not rule out divinity at all. So if we go with option 1, we're left with a double failure here. A, no Christians actually historically believed Mary was a co-member of the Trinity. And then B, they ate food doesn't disprove divinity or a contingent incarnation in any way. All right, let's now move to option 2 and see if it fares any better. So option 2 is the idea that Jesus and Mary are equally divine. This interpretation would mean that Christians supposedly believed that Mary was divine, just like Jesus, though not necessarily as a formal member of the Trinity. But here's the obvious problem with this one. You're going to start to see a pattern here. There's simply no evidence, historical or otherwise, that any Christians held this view. No one in Christian history, from the earliest councils to the modern day, actually held that Mary possessed divinity on par with Jesus. The Quran, if it's targeting this view, is again targeting a straw man. Moreover, we also have a counting problem here, because the Quran says Christians believe that Allah is the third of three. Remember in 573. If the author of the Quran didn't think Mary was a member of the Trinity, but then said Christians say that she's divine, like a god, then Allah would have to be the third of four: Father, Son, Holy Ghost, the Trinity, and then Mary. We then have to say that the author of the Quran actually counted incorrectly. But now on to problem B. As we've already discussed, they ate food doesn't work as a refutation of divinity. In option 1, we established that divine beings can contingently take on a human body by choice. Therefore, they ate food establishes nothing. So option 2 fails in the same two ways. A, there's no historical basis for any belief in Mary as equally divine with Jesus. And B, they ate food doesn't work as an argument against divinity anyways. Now let's turn to option 3, where things are about to get a whole lot more interesting. By now you might be thinking surely the third option has to be better than the first two, right? After all, the first two interpretations fail on multiple levels. This final interpretation suggests that Surah 575 targets a belief that both Jesus and Mary possessed incorruptible bodies during their time on earth, meaning that they were immune to any form of bodily decay. The Quran's argument, they both ate food, would thus imply that their bodies were like any other humans, naturally subject to decay. Sounds kind of interesting, right? Not so fast. So let's actually first break down what incorruptibility actually means. So in Christian terminology, incorruptibility means that a body avoids decay either fully or partially after death. Now, while Christians generally believe that Jesus was incorruptible post-resurrection, his post-resurrection body was incorruptible, there were certain groups, like the Julianists, that took it a lot further. They suggested that Jesus' body was not just free from decay after the resurrection, but was also immune to it during his earthly life, a obviously controversial stance that also caused heated debates within Christianity. So to this group, to the Julianists, Jesus' incorruptible body was a sign of his divinity, a way of sort of preserving his holiness even while he was physically alive. But what about Mary? So historically, from a historical perspective, Christians did venerate Mary, and they believed that her body was preserved after her death. Yet they did not believe that her body was incorruptible while she was alive. For Byzantine Christians, the group of Christians that would have been around during the time of Muhammad, Mary was fully human during her earthly life, experiencing life's frailties as any other person would. It was only after after her death, or at least they believed, that her body was shielded from decay. This belief upheld Mary's humanity while also honoring her special role as Jesus' mother. Unlike the Julianist views about Jesus, we have no evidence that anyone claimed Mary's earthly body was inherently free from decay. Now, here's the issue, okay? So if Christians at that time believed Mary's body was ordinary while she was alive, then the Quran's argument about they both ate food doesn't even touch on the genuine Christian doctrine. It's once again arguing against a straw man. But so how can we be so sure that there were no Christians at the time that believed in Mary's incorruptibility during her earthly life? Well, I actually consulted scholars on this very question. So Dr. Klaus von Stach, who is the co-author of Mary in the Quran, clarified in correspondence that no primary evidence exists to support the idea that Mary's body was considered incorruptible while she was alive. Even the Julianists, who were known for their radical views on incorruptibility, only applied this to Jesus. They didn't apply it to Mary. Now, some scholars have hypothesized that a small Christian group might have held this view about Mary just to basically reconcile Surah 575 with known history. But think about this for a second. Like, why would we invent an unattested belief to explain away an error in the Quran? Like, a much simpler explanation is just that the Quran simply misunderstood Christian beliefs, as it does in other places, such as the claim in Surah 930 that Jews worshipped Ezra as the son of God. So once again, in option 3, the Quran is targeting a straw man. All right, now let's tackle problem B, because this is where the verse's logic truly unravels. The Quran's claim that they both ate food is supposed to be this like really powerful refutation of Jesus and Mary's incorruptibility. But here's the catch, okay? Eating food doesn't actually imply anything about a body's ability to decay. It's like trying to prove someone isn't invincible because they like eating pizza. Like, it just doesn't follow at all. Think about it this way, okay? Imagine you've got this like supercar that was designed with some sort of revolutionary anti-rust metal. Okay, no matter what the conditions are, rain, mud, salt on the roads, this car is never gonna corrode. All right, now let's say that the owner pops like a little bobblehead on the dashboard of their car. Okay, does this mean that the car's rust-proof body suddenly needs maintenance or something? Or like could somehow be compromised by adding a little decoration? No, not at all. Like the owner's choice to put a bobblehead or even an air freshener in the car has nothing to do with its durability. It's literally only there because the owner wants it there. In the same way, if Jesus or Mary were actually incorruptible, like eating food wouldn't affect that state in the slightest. Christians believe that Jesus chose to experience life fully, like sharing meals with his followers as part of his earthly ministry. And the same could be true for Mary. It's easy to see actually why or how they might have joined meals for social or spiritual reasons rather than some biological need. Eating food is not a sign of corruption. It might just be like a sign of human connection. So if the Quran is trying to say that Jesus and Mary's bodies weren't incorruptible because they, quote, ate food, it's making a wonderfully terrible non sequitur, a logical blunder, a misstep that doesn't actually address the belief in question. So in the end, despite scholarly attempts to make option 3 work, it collapses under the same two issues. A, we have no evidence that Christians actually held the belief in the first place, and B, they ate food doesn't logically conflict with incorruptibility. So we're left with a verse targeting beliefs that Christians never actually held and using an argument that doesn't even achieve its intended purpose. But so where does this leave us? Well, if Islam is true, then the Quran, claimed to be a perfect, divinely inspired revelation, would obviously not straw man Christian beliefs or endorse bad arguments. It would represent opposing beliefs accurately and then refute them with clarity and truth. But what do we see in Surah 575? Well, we see a verse that completely misrepresents Christian doctrines and then tries to dismiss them with an argument that fails pretty spectacularly. Like, it's embarrassing how bad this argument actually is. The Quran, instead of presenting a clear and compelling case against Christianity, builds an argument on a foundation of misunderstandings. If this text truly came from the omniscient creator, there would be no room for any such errors. Now, if it's still not obvious how this verse leads to the falsity of Islam, I've put the reasoning into an easy to understand argument. Premise 1, if Islam is true, the Quran wouldn't strawman Christian beliefs or endorse bad arguments. Premise 2, the Quran does both in Surah 575. Conclusion, therefore, Islam is not true. So to the Muslims that are still watching this video, which premise in my argument is false? The logic in it is actually airtight. If you can't tell me which premise is false, then you have to accept the conclusion. Islam is not true. But you know what is true? Christianity.